morning, everyone, and welcome to the press conference of the President of the European Council ahead of the G7 here in Hiroshima. Welcome to you all. Mr. President, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be back in Hiroshima. First of all, I would like to thank Prime Minister Kishida for hosting us. I visited the Peace Memorial this time last year, and I was moved by the tragic story of a survivor who told me how she escaped the terror. It's no coincidence we are here today in Hiroshima, where an immense tragedy took place almost 80 years ago. It reminds us what we, as G7, are defending and why we are defending it. Peace and freedom, because it's what all human beings want most. We are a union of values, and we will defend these values. And that's why we are standing with the people of Ukraine. The Kremlin continues to fan the flames of war across Ukraine. In the EU, we are working hard to get Ukraine what they need: more weapons, more ammunition, and faster. This will be crucial to its counteroffensive. We have stood by the people of Ukraine since day one with solidarity and resolve, and we will keep it up for as long as it takes. We will reaffirm our support for Ukraine's effort towards lasting peace, our EU support for Zelensky's peace formula. Any credible peace plan must be anchored in the principles of UN Charter, territorial sovereignty, and territorial integrity. One thing is clear: it's only up to Ukraine to decide when to consider negotiations. Here in Hiroshima, we again clearly state that Russia's rhetoric is unacceptable and irresponsible, especially Russia's nuclear rhetoric. And we call out Russia's reckless actions around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which deliberately risks the safety of an entire continent. The EU also gives great importance to nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control. We reaffirm here in Hiroshima our full support for the Treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. We will continue to back Ukraine with strong military, political, humanitarian, and financial support. The EU and its member states have already provided over 70 billion euros in assistance to Ukraine. The EU has also taken sweeping action to curb Russia's military action. We are now focused on shutting the door on loopholes and continuing to cut Russia off from critical supplies. We will restrict trade in Russian diamonds. Russian diamonds are not forever. And we will lay out openly and frankly why these sanctions are necessary and justified. Russian propaganda is built on lies and conspiracy. We are fighting back with the facts and figures. The EU is also building strong partnerships around the world. Only last year, we spent 90 billion euros on global development assistance, and this makes the EU and its member states by far the largest provider of development support. We are also engaging with partners to forge mutually beneficial partnerships. Many developing countries have moved into acute indebtedness. Multilateral development banks have a key role to play, not only in the classical areas of development and poverty relief. It's essential that they can mobilize private capital, in particular support of a wider range of countries in tackling both the climate and digital transition. The G20 presidency's work to reform these multilateral development banks is extremely important. They need to do better, and they need to do more. Ladies and gentlemen, trade, open trade, is the European DNA. That's why we are working to build an open, rules-based multilateral trading system. And it's time to back the reforms of Director General Gozzi and make the WTO fit for purpose and able to resolve trade disputes. Our goal must be to ensure a global level playing field. Trade policy plays a key role in advancing our partners' green and digital transitions, human rights and labour conditions. Ladies and gentlemen, a stable and constructive relation with China is in our mutual interest. The EU is firm on our values. We will keep voicing our concerns on human rights, whether it is in Hong Kong, in Xinjiang, or in Tibet. We will not tolerate interferences in our countries that would undermine our democratic societies, and we will promote our interests. We have an interest in stable economic relations. We don't want to decouple, but de-risk to reduce over-dependencies and diversify, to address unfair practices. We balance our trade relationship is what we must do and create a true level playing field for our companies and for our workers. We also need to engage together with China on global challenges, climate change, conservation of natural resources, biodiversity, debt sustainability. Given its role in the international community and the size of its economy, China has a special responsibility in the world. It has to play by international rules, and we call on China to press Russia to stop its military aggression. On Taiwan, we maintain our one China policy, no unilateral change of the status quo. Finally, we need to build a global system where power is shared more fairly, and we need to do it together. Reform of the United Nations and the World Trade Organization would be steps in the right direction. And we also have a common responsibility to ensure that the multilateral system can deliver. I have long advocated for African Union membership in the G20, so I'm extremely pleased to see we succeeded to put it in our draft declaration. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like again to thank you, dear people of Japan, dear Prime Minister Kishida, for your warm welcome here in Hiroshima. Europe and Japan share a strong bond, the painful memory of the death and destruction of world wars. And that's why we are so determined to make sure this never happens again, and that's why the EU and G7 will defend the fundamental principles of the UN Charter for greater peace and for greater prosperity. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your opening remarks and for the speech. I wanted to ask you a question about, can you try to elaborate about why the sanctions which G7 nations may try to agree on Russia during this summit? So, do you expect G7 to raise tightening of sanctions on Russia with non-G7 members such as India, and those prime ministers will be also attending here a meeting and summit? Thank you.
Yeah, you know that you have decided to put in place a very tough regime of sanctions in order to be painful against Russia and to stop the Russia's war machine. And since day one, we have worked very closely with our partners, especially in the G7 meeting. And it is good that we'll have the occasion also to meet other countries which are not members of the G7, and we have the occasion to talk again with them in order to explain what are the reasons. And the reasons, this is the war launched by Russia against Ukraine, and that's why it is so important to explain and to convince. If we want to defend the multilateral rules-based order, we need to be serious, we need to be firm, we need to be clear. This is not possible to make a compromise on such an important topic. And for instance, you know that we are also extremely committed on the EU side in order to support the efforts, especially in the Global South, for more sustainable development. We are by far, I would like to repeat it, the first sponsor in terms of development aid, development assistance to that part of the world. And I think that it's very important to have an open, a frank debate on that question. It will not be the first time since the start of this full-scale invasion against Ukraine. Many times we had the occasion to engage in a bilateral way or in multilateral fora with those countries and to try to convince them that it's very important to be very tough, to be very firm, and to make clear that what Russia is doing is not acceptable because it is a clear and a blatant violation of the multilateral order.
Thank you. Ansgar, yes, from DPA.
Ansgar, the German press agency, DPA. President Michel, can you confirm that the Biden administration has signaled to European allies that the United States would allow them to export F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine? And a second question on sanctions and diamonds. Has the Belgian government signaled to you that it would agree on an import ban on Russian diamonds? Thank you.
Well, there are two elements. First element, the military support for Ukraine, and on a regular basis, this is not a secret for you. We are in close coordination with our partners, with our allies, in order to have a common approach in terms of military support for Ukraine. Today, we'll have the occasion to discuss this topic together with Joe Biden and the other members of the G20, and we will assess what's the level of the additional support that will be needed. It's very clear that Ukraine needs more military equipment. That's why on the EU side, we have decided to put in place a system in order to increase the level of production of ammunition, and we need to speed up our efforts. And in terms of fighter jets, you have seen probably that some countries have announced a coalition in order to start training for pilots. We'll discuss the topic today with the United States and with the other partners. In terms of sanctions in the field of diamonds, I don't intend to speak on behalf of the Belgian government, you can imagine, but there are two debates. On the one hand, we have the debate here in the G7, and you know that in parallel there is a debate for an 11th package of sanctions on the EU side, and we will make sure that there is a coherent approach, the G7 on the one hand, and what you are doing at the EU level on the other hand.
Catherine from ARD. Yes, you had a question.
I said. So it's a little bit the same question on diamonds. How sure is it that an embargo about diamonds exports will be part of the final communique, especially from Brazil, for example?
Yeah, but here we'll start the meetings today, and we have prepared the statement, but only at the end of the meeting. You will know, and we will know what will be the final version of the statement. But I'm confident that the double approach is to restrict trade on Russian diamonds. This is what we are working on together with the partners. And again, this is good on all those topics, not only the field of diamonds, but also on the other topics, that we will meet other important countries in order to have a very good, I hope, dialogue with them, in order to explain why we are absolutely convinced it's needed to target Russia with our sanctions, because what Russia is doing is extremely dangerous, not only for the security on the European continent, it's dangerous for the world, because it's a dangerous precedent. It gives the impression that it's possible for a big country to invade a neighbor without any consequence. This is not acceptable, and that's why I'm absolutely convinced that we were right to take Russia by surprise, because we were, and we have been, extremely united on the EU side, but also together with our like-minded partners across the world.
Vincent from RFI. Bonjour.
Bonjour Monsieur le Président. Vous dites qu'il y a débat ici au G7 sur les diamants, y compris aussi dans l'Union européenne. Est-ce que vous pensez qu'il est possible de parvenir à un consensus sur ce thème précis dans l'Union sur les diamants russes?
I have the impression it is very important to work on the traceability, and it's what we need to do, to put a system in place that will be efficient, because we all know that the challenge is to make sure with our sanctions that we are painful against Russia, not against ourselves. This is systematically the same principle that we have tried to put in place, being painful against Russia in order to curb Russia's war machine, not to be painful on ourselves. And that's why it requires a certain level of expertise, and that's why I'm telling you that on the one hand there is this debate at the level of the G7, and I have the impression this debate will have an influence on how we are acting on the EU side. And you remember that this is the 11th package of sanctions that we are currently discussing on the EU side, And you remember that for all the 10 previous packages, systematically, we have coordinated with our partners, with our like-minded partners. And this is the right approach in order to make sure that you have a current approach in terms of sanctions against Russia.
Thank you. Daniel Brosler, Süddeutsche Zeitung. I'd like to ask you about European unity on the question of how to move on with the sanctions. If I understand the German Chancellor correctly, he's talking about closing loopholes now but not moving forward to a new level of sanctions. So would you say there is a controversial debate among Europeans how to move on now?
This is a very interesting question because for each package of sanctions, since package number 1, we faced exactly the same questions. Systematically, there were doubts on the possibility to stick together and to be united. And you can observe together with me that, the recent 14 or 15 months, we succeeded systematically to stick together and to agree on 10 packages of sanctions. And it's very clear that each package is more difficult than the previous one because each package, each additional package, requires more political efforts to make a decision. And it is absolutely logical. Then the more we are taking and making sanctions against Russia, the more it is important in parallel to work on the loopholes and to try to avoid the circumvention of sanctions. That's why we've also decided to appoint a representative dedicated to this task, to engage with third countries in order to have a transparent dialogue with third countries and to make sure that we maximize the effect and the impact of our sanctions. But I can confirm to you that in the European Council, the global approach is indeed to focus much more on the fight against the loopholes and the circumventions of sanctions.
Maria-Lisa, you had a question as well. Magdalena is going to give you a microphone.
Hello, Mr. President. Saleh Reza Mohebi from Iran International TV. U.S. official considers Iran the top military backer of Russia. Iran and Russia are expanding military ties, and the IRGC is in the forefront of these expansions. Why EU is refraining from taking action against the IRGC while there have been calls to list IRGC as a terrorist organization? Even the European Parliament voted by a large majority to list the IRGC. Thank you.
We have a very clear position, and we are doing everything to convince all the countries in the world not to support Russia, and we are using all the tools we have in our possession in order to make sure that a large majority of countries across the world are supporting our approach and are not supporting Russia with military tools. There are ties between Russia and Iran. It's not a secret for all of us, but we intend to maximize our diplomatic efforts and to use the different leverage we have in order to convince Iran not to take wrong decisions with regard with this possible support for Russia.
Yes. One more question from the Japanese media.
President Michel, I'm a reporter for Shanghai Media Group. We were aware that the EU had paid attention to Japan's plan to release Fukushima's nuclear waste into the ocean. So can I ask if the G7 leaders will be discussing this issue in the coming days? Thanks.
I'm not certain it will be a topic discussed at the level of the leaders, but this is very clear that we will have good discussions on respect for biodiversity, on the environmental topics. But I am not certain this specific topic will be on the agenda of our leaders' meetings in the next days.
Okay. Thank you very much, President. Thank you for joining us at this press conference ahead of the G7. We'll keep you informed. See you soon. Bye.